And now we'll move on to our next panel. It's called Responsible AI. You know, with great power comes great responsibility, I just said. And how do you govern, in the Indian context, AI, and what are the ethics involved? So PKR will lead that discussion. He's a senior advisor and a public policy expert who's been in the industry for many years. And I'd like to welcome to the stage Vishaka, if you come up, who's the head of public policy at AWS. Thank you very much. Nidhi, Sharat, and Dr. Subi. And PKR will do the more formal introductions. We have a parallel session running in Maple Hall for those who are interested in the economic underpinnings of regulatory policy. So that's in Maple Hall outside, which is going to be run by Pratik Datta from Amarchand Mangaldas. So PKR, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Do we have mic? Okay, off to a great start. I think Krishnan set the note, and Alok and Krishnan's conversation. We'll get this off to a quick start. I have had the pleasure of working with startups for a long time, and a lot of it through TIE, some of it through NASSCOM when I was there. But I think one of the challenges I've faced is when we get into areas of either public policy or ethics and governance, etc. And you know, even back in NASSCOM, we used to keep getting startups to participate in that conversation with the government, with the larger ethics. And the question I would often get from them informally is, "Hame ki farak penda hai?" Okay, this ethics, governance, public policy, big tech stuff. Okay, then I think things began to change. We saw regulatory impact, regulatory action on startups. And I don't think anyone in the fintech community, at least who's regulated or sub-regulated, by RBI, would ever dream of asking, "Hame ki farak penda hai?" Right? I mean, they've seen the kind of impact one change makes. So I think what we'll do is keep this very, try to keep this both interactive and focused on this question that when we're talking of AI ethics and governance, how does it affect startups? And why should they care? And I think we've seen this enough, and I think Gen AI is the most obvious example where, if you are channeling information that you're picking up through an API or whatever, through an LLM, through a backend, through a chat GPT or Kritrim or whatever, but the information that you pass on is problematic, and somebody says, "Hey, that's wrong, and I don't like it, and I'm offended, and I'm going to sue," they'll sue you, and then, you can figure out who's responsible and all of that. That's Gen AI. But even, I think if you look up how startups have been affected by AI issues, whether on a regulatory level or, government action or whatever, you'll find actually it's not Gen AI, but the AI that they've used at the back end for analytics, for HR, for hiring. There's multiple cases of HR bias which have been flagged, and the, startup concerned has said, "Hey, that was, the data set." Okay, but sorry, you are the one who's going to face the brunt of it, not the data set. So clearly, I mean, there are huge questions here. And what I'm going to do is I want to start off by asking everyone here just 2 minutes, a quick bullet point, I think a bit of context on how you engage with AI, and if it's a startup or, depending on your role. And of course, why should they care? So, Subi, should I kick off with you? And yeah, 2 minutes, please.
Hi everybody. And thank you for showing up. I know it's not easy. And it just is a testament to the commitment that we all have to the topic. I couldn't have asked for anyone better to set context than Prashantoda. I come from a startup which is no longer a startup. We became India's first unicorn in 2011. I lead global policy for InMobi. Our second organization is known as Glance. In 2019, we started. By 2021, we were a unicorn again. So we're a double unicorn. It's the first screen that about 400 million Android devices experience anywhere across the world. So 200 million users in India. When you look at AI, a lot of conversation is dominated by Gen AI, as Prashanto said, and all kudos and credit to the wonderful work that they're doing. When we unpack AI, it means the infrastructure, it means the chip layers that you would look at NVIDIA, AMD, global foundries of the world. Then comes the conversation around foundational layers. And a lot of conversation is, are wrappers good? What is it that we're doing with AI? Is that enough? Is that sufficient? And Prashanto is very clear that gyan nahi chahiye. This is a conversation with startups and founders and key takeaways on what does it really mean? Why should they care? So I've had a history of having worked with associations where our job was to speak for the industry, but also build capacity for the government. So basically help them help us. And I can't emphasize enough on how important it is to start caring about regulation. So a lot of it was always from the lens of compliance. Hey, we have to deal with this also. There are studies, and I can't emphasize enough and more, that it will lead to 20 to 30% direct impact on PNL if you do ethics governance by design. What do we mean by ethics and governance in the context of AI? Very, very simple. Sunlight being the best disinfectant. When this conversation started with Niti Aayog, it's the first time that in history of tech innovation and disruption, one, it's not a new conversation. So CDAC, a lot of my professors from IIT would say, we are glorifying large data sets, hai to statistics see. So ML, AI, what we do with them, yesterday the Prime Minister talked about Param computers. What we have in our DNA as Indians is frugal innovation. I'm not even going to bring that down by calling it jugaad. We have the ability to innovate at every level possible. So what is Glance doing? Glance is using AI as an application format, and it's saying what is the best use scenario. How is it that it's going to be relevant for the boy in Meerut, for the guy in Kanpur, for someone in Tumkur? And that is what AI really means in a developing country context. What does regulation mean? Let's go back to the telecom analogy. TRAI, the regulator, which we engage with on a regular basis, has three powers: to rule on tariff, to look at consumer good and protect consumer interests, and to look at orderly growth of the industry. So the test of a good regulation is there enough proliferation? Is it giving you as a country an advantage to be at the world stage? Are you in the room? Are you on the table? What is privacy by design doing? What is AI by design doing? It is giving you the advantage to say, I will have a seat on the table. So as we speak, we've signed a treaty in Europe by the Council of Europe, and it's looking at AI, human rights, democracy. So we came back from UP last month where we did a presentation for the entire cabinet. The chief minister and his cabinet all were present. It was received so well that the chief secretary invited us, and all the additional secretaries, principal secretaries were in the room. They're hungry, and they're saying, tell us use cases. Our doors are open. We're open as long as there are three things. There's oversight. It is due and proportionate. You know what you're doing with data. You're able to create a use case for me saying you're going to be responsible with the data that is collected. From the point of view where the conversation, and I'm not even going to touch fintech right now because it's a nuanced conversation. So when we engage with the bureaucracy, it's just three things. Are you a decision maker? Can you create impact? What's in it for me? When they say me, it means for the larger good. They represent the government and their interest is consumer. Gradually, over time, over the last decades, we've said it's not a bad thing to work with business. So as somebody who's an advocate for the private sector, somebody who works with startup founders day in and day out, our company itself, despite being now 16 years old, still has the startup DNA. We're constantly looking at how do I make sure that India has the seat at the table? How do I look at the industry? How do I look at the core sector? Because you're talking about $15.7 trillion. The combined impact of AI is going to be more than India and China's GDP combined. And that's not a mean number. So it's not a choice anymore. And which is why the engagement has to be, one, learn to tell your story right. Two, know what you're doing with your business. See, engage with the government. You can't have a relationship of fear. So every day we seek opportunities to work with the government to make sure that you're adding to addressing the 3 or 4 key problems, helping in job creation, addressing issues of employment, addressing issues which are contextual. How do we deepen democracy? What can AI do to make sure that
Sorry,
you're
Sudip, I
not
will
just
have
being
to cut you short,
representative?
otherwise we'll run out.
Thank you, Prashanto. I'll stop here.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Nidhi, over to you.
No, thanks for having me. I think the plaguing question that Prashanto started with as well is why should startups care about it? I think there has been, or there was, I definitely want to acknowledge that there's no longer the attitude that this is a problem only for big tech or for the LLMs. Everybody is appreciative of the fact that the problem is hitting close to home. I think the key focus area, I would say, is India doesn't have an overarching specific legislation only for AI. Having said that, there are plenty legislations that are applicable to sector-specific laws and regulations. The Data Protection, the Information Technology Act with the SPDI rules, for example, govern very specifically what is to be done, the manner in which data can be processed, the manner in which consent has to be procured, the manner in which that data can be used. All of these are things that startups need to have their eyes on. Investors investing in companies like this are extremely cognizant of the fact that while today a mother legislation does not exist, they are looking at the readiness of startups that are going to be able to comply with, say, DPDP Act when it is enforced. So working backwards from there, because the net has been cast fairly wide now, we are seeing investors focus on this. We are seeing startups get ready for it, get ahead of this so that when the act is actually implemented, they're not taken by surprise. And any startup that works towards having the right processes in place to be able to tackle this definitely has a competitive advantage. And we're seeing that we just heard it, of course, has a real impact on PNL and all of that, and there are far too many experts here that can comment on, the long-term sort of stability of businesses like that. But definitely from attracting the right kind of capital as well, we're seeing investors and startups focus on this very early on in the journey.
Hey, thanks, Nidhi. That was crisp, and you covered a lot of ground too. And I'm going to take up some of those points. I want to interrupt the flow a little bit if I come to you, Vishakha and Sharath. One, just keep your questions flowing on the WhatsApp QR code that you got, so you must have it open on your WhatsApp. I want to just bring in this point here. Is one of the issues of, apart from competitive advantage and, the points that you make, is one of the requirements for better or improved or some level of ethics and governance, the fear that if things begin to go south, then there will be regulatory intervention. Okay, and that's something that, that's why SROs, different sectors, you want to set up self-regulatory bodies, etc. I wonder if that is one concern that we should be worried about. If things are not handled well at the corporate governance front, then what Krishnan was talking about, he said light touch regulation and all of that may withdraw and we don't have light touch regulation. Vishakha, over to you. You can take up this point if you like, but please, your introductory comments too.
Thanks so much and great to be here. I'll make it easy for you. I'll be very brief in my opening comment and observation. So my name is Vishakha. I work for a company, AWS. And, one of the things that I want to share with everybody about why it's important, in a survey earlier this year where we surveyed about 5,000 organizations across APJ and which included 15,000 employees, what came out was that 92% of the organizations said that by 2028, we will be using AI tools in our business. And that is why you should be interested, because that's where the market will go. And that's why startups will need to be interested. And why should we be interested in regulations? Clearly, because we want regulations to win the confidence of the ecosystem of the user. I think that is extremely important, that we need to earn trust. We need to ensure that when AI is deployed, we will give that confidence that it is going to be consistent with the rules of the law, consistent with human rights, and values of fairness, privacy, and equity. And I think that will be underlying. And that exactly brings to what you said, Prashanta, was, that can we do something collectively before things go south? And that is why having these discussions become important, and that is why engagement of all of us in this discussion becomes important. We all have a role to play here. It's a phenomenal time to be in this ecosystem, in this room today to discuss, but also then translate it into action.
Okay, thank you so much for reiterating that. So I think we are hearing this clearly, and we'll probably hear more of this, that we are all part of the problem and the solution as far as ensuring that there is ethics and governance, etc., up to a certain level. Because if it's not, then yeah, okay, the regulators will intervene, the government will intervene, and you won't have light touch regulation. Sharath, let me come to you. I think Kritrim is in an interesting space, and we had one of our colleagues on TIE, Rajan Anandan, who's been there as a foundational member. He had kicked off this conversation with Sam Altman and said that, do you think three guys, can build a foundational model? And Sam Altman says, my job to say, no, you can't, but it's your job to do it anyway. And, you guys have done something there. There are a couple of others who have stepped in and said, hey, we have Tech Mahindra as a... So tell us your story a little bit in 2-3 minutes and, how you engage with startups.
Yeah, thanks, Prashanto. So I'm representing Kritrim. It's not just a modeling company, but it also has some cloud services as well. So you can hear more about it in our kiosk, which is on the left here. So like I said, foundational models, I think people here have already kind of quoted what is the advantage or what's the market opportunity for having foundational models. In the Indian context, all these models that exist right now as Gen AI models are probably mostly for English. I think that's the motivation of building in India, building for India, that kind of kick-started Kritrim LLM. That's one part. And again, LLM is just working on the text, and the other things that we're building is around voice and images as well. So we're kind of supporting Indian languages in voice as well. You can play around with all of these right now in the cloud. You can, and it's actively being developed, and then so you'll see it iteratively improving over time. So that's one part of it. And then the second part I want to kind of spend time on is actually the topic of today, which is responsible AI. I think what is the definition of responsible AI probably has been called out multiple times here now. So, but the way again, it's probably my personal objective here, which is not objective, my personal point of view. I would probably, because of more startups here, I thought, okay, what does it mean for like people who are building AI models? And my background is AI modeling, right? So I'm a PhD in AI, and that's what I do day in and day out. I would probably put it in, this is my framework of looking at it, right? So who's your target group? Who are you? What does your product do with this AI model? And then third, what are the sentiments around it, right? So, and this three kind of vetted within the company saying, okay, what does the societal impact of this mean is, I think, where you will probably spend some time. And I think this should happen very beginning, much before you even start building anything, right? Have a thought about where is it going to be used, how is it going to be used, and so on. Just as to kind of make it more concrete, think of a model that kind of sees the image, identifies what is in that image, right? So you can't, and looking at a person, let's say there's a person, and then you can't say that there's a male or female, because it's impossible to get a gender right, and then it's probably not fair as well to guess the gender just by the looks of it, right? So then you would want to call it, not go to the granularity of saying male or female, but you would probably want to call it as a person, which is kind of fair for everyone, right? So this is where I'm calling, hey, responsibility or responsible AI doesn't mean just, hey, collecting the right data, but also kind of thinking, what is the right way to present the model's performance to a user and keeping it fair, right? So I think this kind of translates to different things based on what you're working on. But generally, in addition to the government and the governance that might kick in, you being personally responsible for the things that you're building, for the users that might be using, I think that is where the value add comes in, and that's probably what the panelists were also talking about, saying if you're more ethical, probably you'll earn a lot over the 15-20% that you would gain will come in, right? So I think that's the thinking as startups we should have. I think we are in the same journey, but I'll probably end with one thing: being responsible is also kind of expensive, right? So we probably, as a capital, or as startups, we don't have the resources for it. So you probably, depending on the domain you're working on, you probably have to look at it differently. That's my take, but we'll probably discuss it a little later. Yeah, thanks.
Okay, terrific. I think great points brought across. And I think one thing that you raised and we covered in bits is what's responsible, what is the responsible AI part. And one of the approaches, if you go especially on light touch regulation, is harms. Okay, don't do anything which will harm people. So it's a harms-based, risk-based, graded sort of approach. But I think in India, you also have this other thing, offend no one, right? So that's a second thing which, and arguably that's a harm. If you offend somebody badly enough, that's another harm. And we've seen what happens there, because there's enough of offense, then you have action which is like, okay, set up a chief compliance officer, set up a, and for startups, that's one heck of an additional cost. So I want to just know if there are any questions here at this point, because we have just 6.5 minutes. If not, I'm going to just move this question round to these two questions. This concern about, regulatory overreach or government overreach from a starting point where they're all saying, okay, light touch. But then if there's enough harm, enough offense, etc., self-regulation not going well, corporate governance not going well, ethics and governance, then you go to the next stage, which is then extra costs for all of you. Okay, so would love a quick response on that, and if you can just keep it to like 1 minute max on this. Subhi, go ahead.
Thank you, Prashanto. So, couple of things. We know that this is going to happen. As an industry, we've never asked for, so when it comes to anything disruptive in technology, the fundamental rule being law will always play catch up to policy. The idea of the startup is the speed of innovation and disruption. The fact that you can move fast. So what did we do as a result? We worked with every single ministry that would be a stakeholder for us. With the Ministry of MIT, with USI, with think tanks, we made sure that we created frameworks that work for India from a developing country, emerging economy perspective. So one of the first frameworks we launched is called the FIST framework. It's a framework for integrity, safety, and trust. With consumer affairs, who are really the custodians of everything that impacts as a consumer tech company, on World Consumer Awareness Day, we launched something called the Guardian Framework. And most importantly, it's a very simple, fundamental approach. We call it the ABCD of responsible AI. So while we did talk about it in the beginning, Prasanto, it's just about adoption. And for adoption, we mean fast adoption, test beds, and innovation. Then we talked about balance, which was between innovation and regulation sits the idea of responsible AI. We don't see this as a land grab. When we say cost of compliance or being responsible is expensive, that is where the fruits of being responsible come in very early and they balance the net-net. Then comes choice. So the moment you're saying we are not being monopolistic, people have options. The consumer has options. And that's where we believe in the principle of may 1,000 flowers bloom. And the last is about data. So anything to do with AI, we need to understand there's also data poisoning. You do not build anything unless you have access to data. And this is where can you create use cases on a macro as well as a micro environment come in. So fantastic point, Prashanto. If you don't take care of the framework, if you don't make it easy for the government to work with you, yes, they will want to control. And that's not a very happy situation to be at. So that's what we do. We first unpack what is it that we're building, what is it that we're trying to solve for, how does it make sense, and anybody who's trying to build a brand with purpose must know you must be able to give back to the community.
Great, thanks. I think that's a great segue into this. So, the same question, but we've seen, so, Bishakha, you and I worked in NASSCOM, and I think we've seen that startups do have a voice and a significant voice if aggregated. Okay, in fact, it helps our case sometimes in public policy if you are able to get the startup voice also, etc., into the ecosystem. So do you think from that sense, they would have a strong role to play in the ethics and governance conversation?
Absolutely. I think that's foundational, with innovation being the defining factor for AI adoption, AI deployment. I think startups have to do it, but let's also understand that, startups are constrained. They still have to go to the investors, and I'm not sure whether investors will actually support, startups with the time that, yes, go ahead and comply and figure out compliance frameworks. Don't worry about, customers. Don't worry about users. And I think that, of course, is a factor that preys on their mind. But there are various ways in which, you can actually convert this theoretical responsible AI to practice. And, Shubhi talked about frameworks, but there are multiple tools that are already available, and it's, this partnership that you have across the value chain of AI which can build in a lot of confidence, transparency, reporting. And I think there are global efforts as well where governments are involved as much as industry, where, we are committing to certain codes of practices, whether it's, red teaming or even rewarding third parties for, looking at vulnerabilities, even, working on tools that address not just threat from outside, but even insider threats. And I think these kind of coalitions that and code of conduct that we're driving is again going to raise awareness and raise confidence amongst not just the companies and organizations, but also government. So effectively, there is no central guardian for AI responsibility. I think that is something that we have to realize fundamentally. We are at that point in time where there is no central guardian. I think this is therefore this great inflection point for all of us to figure out who does what and how much, right? And this whole collective approach to responsibility has to really kick in.
Okay, so great point there. I think would investors want startups to go and really be vocal in a policy conversation like this? And I think they've seen this problem in other areas like fintech, where, okay, startups said, let's push regulatory arbitrage till the boundaries. And then RBI said enough. Okay, and startups which investors had invested several $1 billion in that space were suddenly affected because of one FAQ which said, no, you can't load credit on PPI and so on. Nidhi, what do you think? How is this a significant factor for startups to want to participate in this conversation?
Absolutely.
And we have just a minute, so short point from you, and then Sharath to wrap up.
No, I think aligned, Prashanto, I think it is important. Investors have their eyes on it all the time. But again, investors are nothing but just fiduciaries for and of the people whose money they manage. And to that limited extent, they are very conscious about, things like ethics, governance, and all of that. Those conversations are very real. They are happy to support and make even recommendations to ministries for and on behalf of the industry. So I'll give you two examples just in the context of responsible AI and say even the DPDP Act that is going to be very, very relevant for startups. There are exemptions that are in the works, right, for certain kinds of startups and for exemptions from certain kinds of provisions. So a phased kind of implementation in that manner also helps the conversation, both from a startup and investor standpoint. And investors are very supportive of ease of doing business in India kind of exemptions that come through. And the second is the implementation itself is not like ripping off a Band-Aid. It will happen in a phased manner. And again, that also gives you a little bit of a runway, especially for companies in the early journey of their growth, as to how they're going to deal with this and unpack some of this. So again, I think this is a balancing act. Regulator and ministries are extremely cognizant of being flexible. They have their eyes on it. But I think investors are supportive of the conversation.
Lovely. Sharath, last words to you. And, Ola is no longer really a startup, but I must say that even as a startup, and in NASSCOM, for example, Ola was always very participative in the policy conversation, so that was nice. But even then, it was like, close to a unicorn at that time. But last words to you.
Well, Kruthim is still treated as a startup, although Ola is the big boss there.
Kruthim is, okay, great.
Right, no, but I think I'm aligned with what Nidhi was saying, right? So, yes, it is expensive. Yes, investors are supporting these conversations. But it is also now that all AI models needs governance, right? So pretty much most of the people right now, most of the startups probably not building LLMs. They're building smaller models that are relevant for the particular use case. And the domain that they're targeting in is probably where all the questions come in. If it's probably in health and defense, probably there is a lot more regulations that's required. But otherwise, it's fine, right? So it's okay to fail. And even bigger companies still are like what you're saying. So it's kind of phased out. Probably like even now, right? If you think of responsible AI, carbon neutrality is another dimension for it. And bigger companies are still kind of getting to those goals, and they've targeted 2030 and 2050, right? So what I'm saying is it's okay, depending on the domain you are in and then the area that you're in, there are different goals, but be fair as a company, have self-regulation and then try to stick to it. I think that's the right way to do it.
Terrific. Thank you so much. And, if you do have questions, we're out of time, but please do keep feeding them into the channel, and, we can take up questions on, especially on how you can participate in this conversation. Thanks, everyone on the panel, and Gautam, over to you.
Thank you,
Sorry
PKR. Thank you so much. Big round of applause to our panelists and PKR, our moderator. We have a token gift. PKR, if you could give, let's get a group picture, and then we have a gift from Assembly and Nurturing Green. So PKR will give our panelists the gifts. It's great to see the industry together on governance, so we hope to continue that.